Afternoon. Welcome to our lecture program. I am Kostas Zanos, Vice President and Chair of the Program Committee of Hellenic Link Midwest. Before introducing our speaker, I would like to say a few words about our next event. On Sunday, April 21, 2024, at 3 p.m. Chicago time, we will present Professor George Anagnostou in a lecture titled Toil and Rage in a New Land, Greek Immigrants in the U.S. Mining Industry, 1900-1924. This is going to be a live lecture, which is going to be held at the Hotel 4 Points by Sheraton at Cedar Park, at the southwest corner of Irving Park Road and Manheim Road, close to the O'Hare Airport. This lecture will be supported by the Hellenic Foundation Chicago. Our speaker this afternoon is Dr. Nikos Nikoloudis, who joined us from Athens, Greece. Dr. Nikoloudis holds a doctorate degree from the Center of Byzantine and Modern Greek Studies at King's College, London. He has taught history courses at the college year in Athens, the Athens School for Tourist Guides, and the YWCA. He has also taught at postgraduate seminars at the Athens Institute for Education and Research. His area of research interests includes military and socio-political history in medieval and modern Greece, in South and Eastern Europe, the Middle East, and the Mediterranean. He has served as editor-in-chief of the journal Historica Themata, has co-authored 2 textbooks for the Hellenic Open University, and has published another 13 books and many articles. As always, we will close the lecture with a questions and answer session. You can type your questions at any time by clicking on the Q&A button, the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. This will open a screen where you can type your questions. Those who attend the event on Facebook, they can type their questions on the comment box on the left or at the right bottom of the screen. Dr. Nikoloudis, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Janos, and I would like to thank the Hellenic Link Midwest as a whole for inviting me once again to your interesting series of lectures. Today's subject is entitled The Promotion in the West of the Greek Struggle for Independence from 1821 to 1827. It's a very wide topic, and for the sake of time and better understanding, I've decided to somewhat narrow it down by specializing it in the field of the contribution of Greek networks, as stated in the subtitle. And by that I mean networks of Greeks working abroad in the West, in Western Europe mainly, which contributed to the promotion of the Greek cause, especially in the early years of the Greek Revolution, from the beginning and for the next 2 or 3 years, with a few references to later events. But the issue is too wide to cover in an hour or so, or even less. So hopefully, if there is interest from the audience, I could answer questions on the basis of my presentation afterwards. So I'll start by giving a general idea of the political climate and situation in the post-Napoleonic Europe. As we know, in June 1815, Napoleon was finally defeated at Waterloo, and this event marked the return of the old authoritarian regimes in continental Europe. As a result, the Republican ideas which had spread out since the early days of the French Revolution, and freedom of speech ended up being tolerated in just a handful of European states. And namely, those were England, Switzerland, the constitutional monarchies of Württemberg, Bavaria, in Germany, and the Netherlands. There were another two democracies beyond the European continent, that is the United States of America since 1783 and Haiti since 1803. Essentially, for the organizations in charge of European politics at the time were the Second Quadruple Alliance, which was a politico-military alliance, and the Holy Alliance. They were both formed in 1815 before the Battle of Waterloo. The Second Quadruple Alliance consisting of Great Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia, the four powers that defeated Napoleon. And the Holy Alliance, which was more ideologically motivated, consisted of Austria, Russia, and Prussia. That is 3 out of the 4 of the Quadruple Alliance. Their aim being the protection of Christian values and God-given rights of sovereign monarchs. In any case, though, both alliances were orchestrated and manipulated by the Austrian Chancellor Clemens von Metternich. The joint aims of these alliances were to enforce the peace settlement as arranged by the Congress of Vienna, which was characterized by the predominance of conservative ideas, and to suppress liberal movements appearing to threaten established political order in Europe. Just a quick reminder of how the Greek Revolution started in this set of circumstances. On the 22nd of February 1821, Old Style, Alexandros Ypsilantis, a general in the Russian army and aide-de-camp to Tsar Alexander I, crossed the river Pruth, which was the border between the Russian Empire and the Ottoman provinces of Moldavia and Wallachia, the so-called Danubian principalities, and entered these principalities, which were semi-autonomous and populated by a large number of Greeks. This was a decoy, though. The main events of the revolution were to take place in Greece as such, and there the revolution started approximately a month later. I'm not giving the specific date of the 25th of March, which is the traditionally acknowledged date as the beginning of the revolution, because in the Peloponnese, where the whole thing started, Greeks had already started taking arms in various places before the 25th, and those were Mani, Kalavrita in the north, Kalamata in the southwest, and so on. What was the initial perception in Europe of the Greek struggle? The Greek Revolution, which, as many of us know, was instigated by the clandestine activities of the Filiki Eteria, a secret political society, was seen first as a threat to political stability in southeastern Europe, despite the fact that the Ottoman Empire was not in any sense a member of the Holy Alliance. It was also seen as an offshoot of simultaneous liberal movements which had started in other parts of Europe, and those were essentially the Carbonari uprisings in Italy in 1820 and 21, and the so-called Trienio Liberal in Spain, which was a 3-year constitutional interval, if you like, in the period between 1820 and 23, when it was eventually suppressed by an invasion of French forces. So in this context, newspapers, major European newspapers, started commenting very negatively on the Greek Revolution. I'll start with some comments from French newspapers. The first was the La Gazette de France, which commented on the Filiki Eteria on the 4th of April by characterizing it, by calling it rather a secret society following the Masonic model of political organization. A few months later, another newspaper, Le Journal de Débat, said they wrote the following on the 21st of September. about the Greek Revolution. Those punished for the rebellion, including the Greek patriarch, who had already been killed by the Turkish authorities, and other clergymen, suffered nothing more than the punishment they deserved. The most hostile views were expressed by an Austrian newspaper, the Österreichischer Beobachter, which translates as Austrian Observer, and which was a semi-formal instrument of Metternich. This newspaper tried repeatedly to undermine the growing Philhellenic movement in continental Europe, and in a very significant publication on the 7th of June in 1821, just a couple of months really after the outbreak of the revolution, Friedrich von Gentz, who was its Ghost's chief editor and a close associate of Metternich, as well as a well-known political commentator of the period, attempted to deconstruct the true nature of the Greek Revolution. The main arguments that were recorded in this publication were the following. The Greek Revolution was not a clash between Christianity and Islam, since the Ottoman Empire was also inhabited by various Christian Orthodox peoples hostile to the Greeks. The revolution in the Peloponnese and the Aegean Islands aimed at restoring ancient Greece, which was folly, of course. No such pretense had been made in any document of the Greek Revolution. The close succession of revolutions in Italy and elsewhere in Europe by the Greek Revolution proved the latter's ideological relation with them, which was again misrepresentation. Furthermore, the author claimed the events of the Danubian principalities had been influenced by political lies. They did not really comply with the aims of the Philikiad area, since local populations in the Danubian principalities enjoyed an almost complete independence from the Ottoman Empire, and the true grievances were directed against the absolutism of their Phanariot rulers. For those who might not be able to comprehend this bit of information, I'll explain that these two semi-independent principalities were under the Ottoman rule, but governed by Greeks from the Greek neighborhood of Istanbul called Phanari, and that's why they were called Phanariot generally. The final argument was that the organization of the revolution had involved extensively Ali Pasha of Ioannina, the famous local ruler of Epirus and Albania, whose position had improved after its outbreak. That was a complete lie, because actually Ali Pasha had been practically defeated by the Sultan's troops and was under siege in his fortress of the capital of Ioannina. So the author concluded with an ominous reference to the previous major revolution in Greek lands, which had occurred in 1770 and was known as the Orlov Revolt. Again said then, it is only with sorrow that one can think of the consequences of a venture calculated so badly and founded on passion and lies. The very unpleasant consequences for many thousands of Christian Greek populations arising from ventures attempted in the Peloponnese during the 7th decade of the past century, in 1770, are well known. Now, let's move, though, to Britain, which, as I said, had withdrawn from the contest of the Holy Alliance, or rather never joined it, where responses were more cautious on the whole. The London Times reported on the 11th of April, 1821, with an acknowledgement of the Greeks' deep hatred and despise for the Turkish rulers, along with the fact that the revolution was long overdue. A couple of weeks later, on the 26th of April, in another issue, the Turks were characterized implacable barbarians. And on the 30th of April, another newspaper, the Courier, which was pro-government in Britain, claimed that no one would be surprised if the Greek Revolution resulted only in words. The Morning Chronicle, another newspaper, reported on the 10th of May of 1821 about expressing Russophobia, which was prevalent in British political circles at the time, mixed with the wish that a way might be found for the Greek people to be relieved of Turkish tyranny. The exact comment was as follows: "It is of importance to the liberty of Europe that European Turkey should not be annexed in the whole or in part to Russia, but humanity revolts at the idea of a people being condemned forever to a state of degrading servitude, and policy and general interests do not require any such sacrifice." And continued by stating that we are not enemies of Greek independence, but of Russian aggrandizement. Therefore, if Londonderry, the Foreign Secretary Lord Castlereagh, who entertains so strong a conviction of the Russian Emperor Alexander's honesty of intentions on this subject, will only undertake to secure Europe against this danger, and he'll find it very easy to reconcile it to the overthrow of Turkish power. So the whole idea, as you can see, it's rather mixed in the comments of the British newspapers. Further on, the Morning Chronicle states, "God forbid that we should ever recommend any attempt to prevent the people suffering from such dreadful misgovernment as that which has made almost a desert of the finest part of Europe." Further on the 29th of June in 1821, the tones of the commentaries of the Morning Chronicle started changing. On that particular day, the comment was as follows: "The infatuation of this nation," meaning the Greek, "becomes more evident, who had built their places upon sand, and thought to gain independence by treachery and shameful massacres, which their leaders call victories. The manner in which both parties carry on the contest excites indignation. It is mostly unarmed persons who are sacrificed. The Mussulman and the Greek vie with each other in cruelty." And to sum it up, I'll present you with a comment by our contemporary British historian David Brewer, who said that with Castlereagh as Foreign Secretary, the Tory government line was that neutrality meant not attempting to support the Greek cause with funds, men, or equipment. A Tory Philhellene was thus virtually a contradiction in terms. On the other hand, and on the greater scale, there were positive attitudes vis-à-vis the Greek cause in the West. Those attitudes were based on Western admiration for ancient Greece. They also focused on the mildness of Greek character vis-à-vis Turkish cruelty. They juxtaposed Christian Greeks to Muslim Turks. And in short, the Greek cause was favored by two contemporary cultural movements, strong cultural movements, classicism and romanticism. Classicism appealing, I would dare say, to more or less of an older generation, and romanticism to the younger generation of the period. Now, let's start with the actual Greeks who contributed to the promotion of the Greek struggle abroad. A well-known figure was Alexandros Mavrokordatos, who in fact was an early exponent of the Greek independence even before it had actually been declared. Who was he? He was a nephew and close associate of Ioannis Karagias, a Phanariot and former prince of Wallachia until 1812, when he was removed by the Sultan and replaced by another Greek. In 1820, a year before the Greek Revolution, Alexandros Mavrokordatos had authorized a political treatise entitled Coup d'œil sur la Turquie, or in English, A Glimpse of Turkey. That treatise was never published at the time for reasons of political expediency, but it is interesting to note that a copy of it had been sent to von Gentz, the commentator of the Österreichische Beobachter. In this treatise, Mavrokordatos argued in favor of Greek independence by stating that Austria and Great Britain were the two main powers that could influence developments in the Ottoman Empire at the expense of Russia. And moreover, if Austria and Britain did not take advantage of the irrevocable decline of the Ottoman Empire, instead of trying to stabilize it, Russia would act first and benefit more than them, as a matter of fact. Let's see some particular points stated in this text. Turkey was a power without an army, without resources, without means, composed of heterogeneous elements which are mutually antagonistic, whose weight in the balance of power is nil. Those who know the Greeks must be persuaded that they will again seize the first opportunity which presents itself to renew their efforts and to finally recover their liberty through any sacrifice necessary. Fast forward a year, right at the beginning with the revolution, the Greek Revolution in the Peloponnese, where the first temporary government, so to speak, of the Greek rebels based in Kalamata, the so-called Messenian Senate, issued a manifesto addressed to Europe, which was soon translated into English, French, Italian, and German. It was dated on the 28th of March, just 3 days after the official outbreak of the Greek Revolution, and signed by the leader of the Maniots, Petrobei Mavromichalis, who was also the chief of the Messenian Senate. The author or authors of this text are unknown and are considered to have been either some member of the Philiki Eteria or Adamantios Korais, who we're going to meet very soon, or the secretary of Mavromichalis as such. Here we have two pictures. On the left, the original text of the manifesto, and a photo of Mavromichalis on the right. Let's read an extract of the manifesto, stating that the insupportable yoke of Ottoman tyranny hath weighted down for above a century the unhappy Greeks of the Peloponnese. Our bands, having burst their fetters, already signalize themselves against the barbarians. Our mouths are opened, heretofore silent or employed only in addressing useless supplications to our tormentors. They now celebrate the deliverance which we have sworn to accomplish or else to perish. We invoke, therefore, the aid of all civilized nations of Europe, that we may the more promptly attain to the goal of a just and sacred enterprise, reconquer our rights, and regenerate our unfortunate people. Greece, our mother, was the lamp that illuminated you. On this ground, she reckons on your philanthropy. Alms, money, and counsel are what she expects from you. We promise you her lively gratitude, which she'll prove by deeds in more prosperous times. There soon followed, in a matter of a couple of months, on the 25th of May, another appeal, this time specifically targeted to Americans, and entitled, or rather sent as an appeal to the citizens of the United States, again signed by Mavromichalis. In that, it was stated that in taking the resolution to live and die for liberty, we feel ourselves drawn toward you by a natural sympathy. It is among you that liberty has found her abode, and she is worshipped by you as by our fathers. In invoking her name, we invoke yours, feeling that in imitating you, we imitate our own ancestors, and that we shall show ourselves worthy of them in proportion as we resemble you. Though separated from you, Americans, by mighty oceans, we are drawn near to you by your virtues. We feel you to be nearer to us than the nations on our frontiers, and we regard you as friends, fellow citizens, and brethren, because you are just, benevolent, and generous. Just for you are free, benevolent and generous, for your laws are the laws of the gospel. More to the point of the lecture as such, the promotion of the Greek cause in Europe was undertaken by various individuals or groups loosely connected to each other. I'll start by mentioning here some of the more active persons involved in this process, namely Petros Epitis, Adamantios Korais, Konstantinos Polychroniadis, and Alexandros Mavrokordatos, whom we've already seen. Now we'll see who Epictetus was. We could call him a real apostle of the Greek cause. He was a doctor and scholar, a member of the Philiki Eteria, and an emissary of Alexandros Ypsilantis in Western Europe. He traveled extensively in many cities of Germany and also to The Hague, Brussels, Amsterdam, Paris, and London. All that in the very early days of the revolution. According to the Greek historian Apostolos Vakalopoulos on Epictetus, he was spending relentlessly his own money. He was Greece's first representative with a special mission in the West, the man who stirred up his fellow countrymen in Europe in an extensive campaign to enlighten its peoples on the just struggle of the Greek nation. However, the real mastermind of support in Western Europe for Greece, especially among intellectuals, was Adamantios Korais. He was a doctor and a prominent classical scholar in Paris, where he'd lived for quite a few decades. In 1821, he was aged 73, but still he organized in Paris a Greek committee for the material and moral support of the Greek struggle, whose members became active in pro-Greek publications and fundraisings. Korais was quick to correspond with various foreign personalities, both political figures and intellectuals, one of whom was the then president of Haiti, Jean-Pierre Boyer, who we see on the right of this picture, of this slide, from whom Korais asked for financial and military support. Boyer replied by regretting his inability to send financial support, but allegedly he sent a shipment of 25 tons of Haitian coffee to be sold for the cause of the Greek independence. Unfortunately, there is no way of knowing whether this shipment reached destination and if it was actually sold, because there is no information, further information on this issue. In Boyer's reply, dated the 15th of January, 1822, we read that with great enthusiasm, we learned that Hellas was finally forced to take up arms in order to gain her freedom and the position that she once held among the nations of the world. Such a beautiful and just case, most importantly, the first successes which have accompanied it, cannot leave Haitians indifferent, for we, like the Hellenes, were for a long time subjected to a dishonorable slavery, and finally with our own chains broke the head of tyranny. Convey to your compatriots the warm wishes that the people of Haiti send on the behalf of your liberation. May they prove to be like their ancestors and guided by the commands of Miltiades, and be able in the fields of New Marathon to achieve the triumph of the holy affair that they have undertaken on behalf of their rights, religion, and motherland. May it be at last, through their wise decisions, that they will be commemorated by history as the heirs of the endurance and virtues of their ancestors. Another significant personality with whom Korais started more lengthy correspondence was Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, who was an old acquaintance of him because they had both met in France, in Paris, in the period 1785 to 89, when Jefferson was the American ambassador there. In the period between July 1823 and January 1825, they exchanged 4 letters, with Korais writing in French and Jefferson replying in English. In these letters, we see Korais' concerns about the course of the revolution, and the reasons for this reason he requested advice on Greece's state building and suggested that the US would send trade representatives to Greece. He also asked for Jefferson's guidance, being concerned about the Greeks' lack of experience in self-government and preparation to address the crisis of early statehood. What Jefferson suggested was that on the basis of his political experience and given Greece's unstable political circumstances, a single, not federal government based on a system of representatives should be put in place, and the balance of the three branches of power, that this is the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. He also praised the freedom of religion, the habeas corpus, trial by jury, the exclusive right of legislation and taxation by the representatives of the people, and freedom of the press. That is all the elements that we find in the American Constitution, in which were the ideals that the Americans fought for during their revolution. He stated in particular that no people sympathize more feelingly than ours with the sufferings of your countrymen. None offer more sincere and ardent praise to heaven for their success, and nothing indeed but the fundamental principle of our government, never to entangle us with the broils of Europe, could restrain our generous youth from taking some part in this holy cause. It is interesting that both Jefferson and Corais shared an interest in classical education, agreeing on the importance of public education and classics for higher education as such. On the right here, the picture, we see the first page of Jefferson's letter dated October 23, 1823. Another ardent supporter of Corais, in particular in Greek independence in general, was Edward Everett. He had been trained as a classical scholar. He was from Massachusetts. At 1819, aged 25, he traveled to Greece accompanying Lord Byron. The same year, he was employed by Harvard as a teacher of classics. And a year later, he appears as the editor of the North American Review, a leading literary magazine. He had met Corais in Paris in 1817, and it was in 1821 that Corais had sent him the announcement of the Greek Declaration of Independence, prompting Everett to found 2 years later, in 1823, the Boston Committee for the Relief of Greeks. In 1824, as a member of Congress, he promoted aid to the Greek cause, ushering support for Greeks on university campuses and among the elite society in Boston, New York, and Philadelphia. On his part, Everett was influential on another significant American, Daniel Webster, a lawyer and a congressman, also from Massachusetts, who was, to begin with, a strong opponent of the Holy Alliance. Motivated by Everett, Webster argued fervently in favor of the Greek cause in the House of Representatives on the 8th of December, 1823. And I'm reading here the concluding remarks of his speech. The Greeks address the civilized world with a pathos not easy to be resisted. They invoke our favor by more moving considerations than can well belong to the condition of any other people. They stretch out their arms to the Christian communities of the earth, beseeching them by a generous recollection of their ancestors, by the consideration of their own desolated and ruined cities and villages, by their wives and children sold into an accursed slavery, by their own blood, which they seem willing to pour out like water, by the common faith and in the name which unites all Christians, that they would extend to them least some token of compassionate regard. Now, returning to Paris, I'm going to present you with another person involved, the Greek involved in this effort, Konstantinos Polychroniadis, or Polychronis, who was a polyglot teacher from the region of Zagori in Epirus, and who in the summer of 1821, as a member of Corais' Greek committee in Paris, published 2 significant works in French arguing in favor of the Greek cause. On the right, you can see the bottom of the picture, his only surviving personal feature, his signature. And these are the title pages of his 2 French works, entitled the first, Considérations sur la guerre actuelle entre le grec et le turc, which would translate as Considerations on the war between Greeks and Turks, and the one to the right entitled Notice sur l'état actuel de la Turquie considéré sur ses rapports commerciaux et politiques avec l'Angleterre, which on my impromptu translation would translate as a notice on the state, the actual state of Turkey, seen through the contacts, the commercial and political contacts with England. What did he say there? In the former, which was published under the deliberately misleading initials SZ for reasons of secrecy, while the latter anonymously, Polychroniadis tried to refute the arguments of the Österreichische Beobachter and to present the Greek Revolution in a more favorable eye. Let me remind you here that they were both published almost simultaneously with the comments of von Gentz in the Österreichische Beobachter in Vienna. The latter work followed in the footsteps of Mavrokordatos' unpublished memorandum of 1820, which I've already presented to you, using the same layout, structure, and arguments. And interestingly enough, after September 1821, Polychroniadis appears as a close associate of Mavrokordatos, that is, removing himself from the circle of Korais, as it turned out. Who were Korais' French associates who helped him in his efforts in France? In July 1821, the Baron Auguste Prosper François Guerrier de Dumas translated into French and published Korais' Salpisma Polemisterion, translating as military trumpet call, a work which had originally been published in Greek in 1801 and which prompted for people to take arms for the Greek Revolution, 20 years before its actual beginning, of course. In the same volume, Dumas also published Alexander Sepsilandis' appeal to the French and Germans, pleading for their support. And a year later, after the destruction of Chios by the Ottomans, he published the lyrical poem Chios, la Grèce et l'Europe, Chios, Greece and Europe. And here we see the covers, first pages on the left of the original Greek text, Salpisma Polemisterion of Korais, and the title page of the French translation on the right. Another interesting case was the French publisher, famous French publisher, Ambroise Firmin Didot, who had established a reputation of publishing classical text. And this fellow who had collaborated with Korais on a more business level before, published in 1825 an appeal to the French for financial assistance to distressed Greek students in France, in which he actually states that Mr. Korais, whose name and virtues are known and appreciated throughout Europe, has been assigned to distribute this assistance to Greece in Paris. Epitis, whom we have already seen before, was also active in Paris independently of Korais, and in the summer of 1821, while in Paris, he managed to meet twice with the French Prime Minister, the 5th Duke of Richelieu, formerly governor of Odessa in Russia, presently Ukraine, which was a city populated largely by Greeks. How did that happen, you might wonder? Because as a royalist, Richelieu had moved out of France while Napoleon was in power, joined the Russians, and been appointed by Tsar Alexander as the governor of Odessa. Returning to France after the fall of Napoleon, he became prime minister, as we've seen, and in the occasion of his meetings with Epitis, he expressed his favor for the Greek cause and assisted in the formation of the Greek committee in Paris. However, this his good feelings did not have any results, really, because in December 1821 he was forced to resign, and soon afterwards, in 1822, he died. Epitis then appears in London, having moved there from Paris. In July 1821, he tried to promote the Greek cause in Britain. In London, he had contacts with potential supporters of the Greek cause, including Frederick North, the 5th Earl of Guildford, who was subsequently the founder of the Ionian Academy in Corfu in 1824. Another significant contact was Thomas Gordon, a Scottish aristocrat and former army officer who later joined the fight in Greece. And finally, John Bowring, a young merchant and subsequent chairman of the London Greek Committee, which was to play a very significant role. I'm not going to expand on it, though, but just mentioning it, in the activities of the Greek Committee in London, which contributed to the raising and handling of the 2 Greek loans of independence, as they were called, sent to Greece for the purposes of the Greek struggle. Now, this is an interesting coincidence, if you like. Soon after Epictetus' arrival in London, there appeared there an English version of Polychroniadis' book, The Notice, and so on, under the English title Remarks on the Present State of Turkey. Its publications was probably financed by the prosperous Greek merchant community of London. And it seems that it was Epictetus who had carried the French publication to London and contributed to its translation. The other thing is that the translation was completed without the knowledge of Polychroniadis, who was probably not fluent in English, as I mentioned earlier. And it seems to have been done by Dimitrios Chinas, whose brother, that's interesting again, was another member of Corrèze committee in Paris. So one brother was in Paris, the other in London, and they both contributed to the promotion of the Greek struggle. The even more important and interesting thing is the impact of the remarks in Great Britain. In combination with Epictetus' tour in London, the publication of the book became game changers. Polychroniadis' arguments for the benefits in store for the British if Great Britain acknowledged the existence of an independent Greece were too eloquent to pass unnoticed. And as a result, on the 1st of August in 1821, the Times published extensive extracts from the remarks. Let's see what the Times wrote. The Greek cause begins to have recourse to the press as a natural auxiliary. The 2 great powers to be enlisted in its service are the hearts of the European nations and the policy of their governments. The writer seems to aim at combining an address to the national sentiment with one to the more solid interests to the state, and strives to demonstrate that by giving an active and decided countenance to the struggling Greeks, England would reap an abundant accession to her commercial greatness and prosperity. Now we have to see which were the potentially receptive audiences in Great Britain for such publication. One group was the political liberals, represented in the House of Commons by the Whigs and Radicals, for example, by a well-known MP, John Cam Hobhouse, a close friend of Lord Byron. Also liberal followers of the well-known philosopher Jeremy Bentham, exponent of a philosophy of utility as a universal guide to a rational and modern system of government, totally coherent and applicable everywhere in the world. A third group were individuals from ethnic minorities such as Scots or Irish, and finally the Quakers. Benthamite views were apparently in accordance with Polychroniadis' ideas, since, according to Bentham's followers, support for Greece's struggle would create business opportunities with the newly established Greek government, as well as throughout the Mediterranean, as a result of the diminishing influence of the Ottoman Empire. Were, though, Bentham's views really compatible as regards the Greek Revolution? I'm presenting here two views, one contemporary by Alexandros Mavrokordatos and the second by the well-known modern historian Mark Mazawa. Mavrokordatos said that Bentham's views were good in theory, but not in practice, while Mazawa states that Benthamites were precursors of those late 20th century technocrats who fanned out across the globe from Europe and the US, advising governments on how to manage their people's affairs. And as we know, this is not a very good practice, at least not very successful in recent years. At this point, there were also some new influences, as we would call them today, for the Greek cause, especially in Britain, where the arrival of Nikolaos Pikolos in September and October 1821, a former member of the Philiki Eteria and an active member of Corrèze's Paris Committee, boosted against the attempts to gain support in Britain. But more significant English support was to be generated elsewhere. And here I'm presenting the connection between Mavrocordatos and the two famous English poets, Shelley and Byron. In the spring of 1821, while residing in Pisa in Italy, a town filled with radicals, romantics, and adventurers, as very eloquently was stated by Mazoa, Mavrocordatos became a close friend of the famous romantic poet Percy Shelley and his wife Mary, the famous author of Frankenstein. Mavrocordatos persuaded Shelley, a political radical, that Greece was bound to gain its freedom. And under this influence, Shelley produced in 1822 his famous lyrical drama Hellas, inspired by Aeschylus's Perse and dedicated to Mavrocordatos. In the foreword of that work, Shelley stated the following: "We are all Greeks. Our laws, our literature, our religion, our arts have their root in Greece. But for Greece, we might still have been savages and idolaters. The modern Greek is the descendant of those glorious beings whom the imagination almost refuses to figure to itself as belonging to our kind, and he inherits much of their sensibility, their rapidity of conception, their enthusiasm, and their courage." In August 1821, Shelley met Lord Byron in Ravenna, in Italy again, and his strong Philhellenism made a strong impression on Byron. In this context, in March 1823, Byron met again in Genoa another Brit, Edward Blackyer, who persuaded him to liaise with the London Greek Committee and assisted in its efforts. Who was Blackyer, though? You probably never heard of him before. He was an Irishman who served with the British fleet in the Mediterranean during the Napoleonic Wars, resigning in 1820. He was also an ardent Benthamite, but he became an excellent opponent, a promoter of the Greek cause. To him, every action of the Greeks was valorous, wise, and admirable, while every action of the Turks was cruel, offensive, and cowardly, so much so that he would even justify the massacres of the Turks at Tripolitsa in September 1821. Another significant exponent of the Greek cause and advocate was the famous politician William Wilberforce, who in 1822 have already been made a name for himself as a protagonist of the abolition of the slave trade in Britain. He commented on the Tory policy on Greek issues as follows: "It's a disgrace to all the powers of Europe that long ere now they have not made a simultaneous effort and driven back a nation of barbarians, the inveterate enemies of Christianity and freedom, into Asia. I know of no case in which the power of a mighty country like England could be more nobly, more generously, or more justifiably exerted than in rescuing the Greeks from bondage and destruction." In January 1823, Andreas Louriotis, an associate of Mavrocordatos and the representative of the Greek government, arrived in London in order to secure financial assistance for the Greek cause. And this arrival prompted, on the 3rd of March 1823, the official inauguration of the London Greek Committee, which was activated in an attempt to indeed secure this loan for the Greek struggle. For the purposes of writing a report on the prospects of such a loan, Blackyer was sent in Greece in the period between March and May 1823, accompanying Louriotis on his return. And on his own return to London, Blackyer wrote a very inaccurately, not to say misleadingly favorable report on Greece for the London Greek Committee. It is interesting to note that, in his own words, Blackyer was enthusiastically favored to Grecian freedom, not less from a sense of religion than of gratitude to their ancestors. And it was thanks to his report that Greece secured its first loan from Britain for the purposes of the war. Moving away from England to Switzerland, there the Greek struggle was promoted in a slightly different context. It was, of course, viewed very, very favorably in the young Swiss Republic, which was founded only in 1814. And despite the country's poverty, forced neutrality, and encirclement by neighbors hostile to the Greek cause, such as France and Austria, the Swiss indeed assisted the Greek struggle materially and financially. The famous historian William St. Clair wrote the following about the Swiss assistance. The citizens of the Swiss cities and cantons had been the first to establish Philhellenic societies in 1821, and they were still making their regular contributions at the end. Alone of all the Greek societies of Europe and America, they continued in active existence throughout the war, continuing their own work even when the spurts of enthusiasm elsewhere had died away. As I implied before, the Swiss were motivated by slightly different stimulations. In January 1823, 160 refugees and followers of Alexander Hypsilandus' failed movement in the Danubian principalities crossed the German-Swiss border. They had left Odessa almost a year earlier, crossing the Ukraine, Russia, Poland, and Germany, a distance of 2,340 kilometers, in an effort to reach Greece via friendly or neutral territories. Their torments and overall behavior sparked a wave of sympathy in every canton or city they reached. And here we have a drawing by two Swiss artists of some of these figures of the refugees. How did the Swiss respond to the Greek cause? I'll present you with two views. The first from the notes of Johann Conrad Troll, who said that the world keeps on forgetting that the Greeks have always been known for their great talent, diligence, courage, self-sufficiency, great intellectual mobility, and ability to endure sacrifices. A people that is able to so dexterously adjust to adverse circumstances in other countries, still taking advantage of them in order to continue to exist, while also retaining a reputation that is meant for the sea, is certainly made of a nucleus consisting of positive elements. Another Swiss, Friedrich Vogel, wrote some years later that a cry of abhorrence arose everywhere on news reached us of the horrendous Turkish acts against the Greek population, and partly other Christians, for the purpose of suppressing the revolution. Ardent prayers for the preservation of the nation of the Greeks reached the sky, along with encouraging hopes when it became known that the Greeks had decided so strongly resist their oppressors, and when the news of their victories over the Turks reached us. Beyond these comments and favorable responses, the significant piece of information is that the strongest Swiss support of the Greek cause was the Genevan banker Jean-Gabriel Eynard, a close friend of Ioannis Kapodistrias, the Tsar's former foreign minister, who in fact resided in Geneva in the period between 1822 and 28. Eynard assisted the Greek Revolution, especially in the critical period of 1826-28, in the latter, the second final period. And later on, after the foundation of the Greek state, he contributed to the foundation of the first Greek bank. And I'll close this tour, if you like, of the West and the Greek support generated there by pointing to the connection between Korais and Friedrich Thiersch, a dedicated follower of Korais in Bavaria, and a classical scholar and university professor. The two men had originally met in Paris in 1813 and corresponded since 1817. In the summer of 1821, Thiersch wrote a series of pro-Greek articles in the Augsburger Allgemeine Zeitung, refuting the views of the Österreichische Beobachter and using Korais' arguments. More precisely, in August 1821, he issued a call for German volunteers to fight for Greece, and also collected money for Greek war needs and care of civilians. By December 1821, he had drawn an organized scheme for the creation of a German legion to fight in Greece, but his plan failed to materialize due to lack of support by the Bavarian king as a result of Austro-Prussian pressure. Finally, in September of 1831 to September 1832, and for practically a year, he traveled to Greece on a field trip to study antiquities. So, completing my presentation and in the context of a general assessment of the Greek revolutionary networks, I'll point to the main features of their activity. There are some negative common features of all these people groups involved. One of them being that there was an impromptu formation of these networks. They were activated in an originally hostile political environment. They differed in their political views and lacked an overall coordination. However, there were also some positive features which in the end made a difference in the fact that all the networks made successful use of available means of publicity, meaning the press, publications, associations with Christianity in classical Greece, largely by exercising public relations on a personal level. I think this must have become clear now by pointing out personal levels between various persons involved in these networks and the local associates. Thus, these networks changed the originally negative outlook of Greek revolution as a subversive political movement into that of a struggle against barbarism. And I'm finishing with an overview for those who like to have a quick look of an indicative bibliography, including English works, and for those of you who can read Greek, some Greek works generally available altogether. Thank you very much, and I'm open to your questions now.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nikoloudis, for this very excellent lecture. To give the opportunity to the attendees to type their questions, I will ask the first question. In the last slide, you mentioned the positive and negatives of the Greek networks in the West to promote the Greek Revolution. Could you elaborate a little bit about the negatives?
Yes, the negatives have to do mostly, in my opinion, with the fact that these were, as I mentioned, impromptu responses. As for many Greeks, especially abroad, the outbreak of the revolution was a sudden event. They were not prepared for it, except from those who were actually involved in the Filikiyet area, and whose names are not known altogether. We just know the names of some of the more significant ones. So they had to really come up with ideas and solutions very quickly to counter the negative publicity which appeared in the early months of the Greek Revolution, starting though from different ideological or political guidelines. I mean, one of the groups that were involved in this process, as might have come out in the course of my presentation, was the Filikiyet area. And actually, some of its members, like Ipitis or Pikolos, who were closely associated with Ypsilantis and his movement in the Danubian principalities, and in fact, sent by him personally as his personal emissaries to the West to promote the struggle from his own point of view. Another influential circle, as I expect might have also come out, working from a different background, was the circle of Korais. Korais was a very famous intellectual, especially as a classical scholar, with a wide circle of connections both in France and abroad, which he motivated with a close circle of associates, including Polychroniadis in the beginning, trying to gain support, as I mentioned, in the US, Haiti, in France as such, and through his associates in other parts of Europe. I would say that this was probably the most influential group altogether, in the sense that it spread out to many countries and many different people of many different backgrounds, politicians in the States or Haiti, or intellectuals such as Thiers in Germany and so on, or even all the different groups in England, which were not connected in anything but their disapproval of the conservative government and its oppressive policies. A third influential person, of course, who played a key role again in Britain, perhaps more so there than Korais or Polychroniadis, was Mavrokordatos, because he had realized, as we saw even before the beginning of the Greek Revolution, that England would be the key country to assist in the Greek struggle, because of all these groups, which are indigenous groups, I mean, in Britain, which had a strong motivation for such a project. As it turned out, the process was slower in Britain than in some other countries. It didn't start materializing until late 1823, early 1824, when Byron, in fact, became the frontman of the Greek Committee of London and took up the task of coordinating the Greek committee in London as a carrier of the loan with Mavrokordatos in Greece as a representative of the Greek authorities. The Greek loans as such were a disaster in terms of their results. They created more havoc because of people trying to take advantage of it in Greece than they actually assisted with the Greek cause, the development of the Greek struggle. But as it turned out, they forced, in a way, the British government under the guidance of Canning, really, not Castlereagh, who had committed suicide in the summer of 1822. But Canning was a Tory politician, but more open-minded, if you like, was the key man who saw the benefits for Britain, for the British government, in breaking the connection between Greece and the Ottoman Empire and pulling Greece into a British sphere of influence in the Mediterranean. So it was Canning, in fact, who acted on his own initiative in July 1827 that managed to have France and Russia signing the July Convention, as it's known, which led 3 months later to the Battle of Navarino. And it was, again, a very fortunate coincidence, because only a month after this convention, Canning died suddenly. So he didn't even live to see the Battle of Navarino. But nevertheless, by this series of unplanned, if you like, events, the whole situation worked out very positively for Greece in Britain, which was the key, the cornerstone of the political environment in Europe, and the key ally, potential ally, that eventually drew, of course, as I said, France and Russia to the towards the benefit to benefit the Greek cause.
Thank you. There is a comment. The Greeks of India in Calcutta raised money for the Greek struggle, which appeared in the London press in August 1824. So I don't know if you're aware of this. That's
I wasn't aware of this. I'm not surprised, really, because Greeks raised money everywhere abroad, from what I know. The thing is, who handled this money and how? I don't think there's any exact calculation of how much money was raised over the years, the decade practically of the Greek Revolution, and spent in Greece. Many people went broke, even Greek tycoons at the time, like the Koundiriotis family and so on, who dedicated their fortunes to the Greek cause. But the thing is that money wouldn't make the final difference if it wasn't for the political manipulations. And I think it was the manipulation of politicians, especially in Britain, that made the difference. May I also add here, if I can, that France was also a late starter, if you like, in Philhellenism. I mean, there were individuals from France who also went to Greece because there was a memory of Napoleon, the Republican ideas, and so on. And more significantly, there were former officers of the French army who joined the Greek struggle. But the French monarchist government was very restrained in its views of the Greek cause, because France was really under supervision from the Holy Alliance. It had the old monarchy had been restored, but the regime was not very stable. And we know that in 1830, right at the end of the Greek Revolution, there was also another French Revolution, which brought down the king of the time, King Charles II, and and replaced him with another person in the throne. So it was only, in fact, an interesting thing is that Chateaubriand, the famous poet, who was the equivalent of Byron in Britain in terms of his intellectual appeal to the French public, who was also minister in the foreign minister in the French government between 1822 and 24, and he was very reserved. He didn't want to openly support the Greek Revolution. However, when he was removed from power in 1824, he changed drastically his views, and he came out openly in favor of the Greek cause, and contributed significantly to the Philhellenic movement in France, which became more evident after the fall of Messaloniki in 1826. So you see, you have different stages from one country to the other, which put them on the map in the whole extent of the Greek Revolution. Of course, Greeks are always in the background, as I said, Greeks of the diaspora, but it's very difficult to find the exact connections and the particular contributions, the individual contributions, if you like, of each one of them, and the time, the exact timing that they appeared.
I don't see any other question. Let me ask another one. Do you have any idea how long it would take at the time to communicate from Greece with England or the United States? How long it would take for a letter from Greece to go to London, and then a response to come back? And then if we talk for the United States, I suppose it would be much, much longer.
Yes, I would agree with you definitely about the United States. I don't think there was any direct connection between, even in terms of correspondence, between the Greek authorities and the United States, for the simple reason that, as we know, because of the Monroe Doctrine, the US government didn't want any direct involvement in any European political affair. But, of course, news spread by letter, and of course, not always by the mail, but usually through personal contacts. I mean, Korais would hand his letters to people he trusted to carry them abroad. That was one of the means that we know that the Greek ideas spread out. There was also another obstacle, that in the early years of the revolution, one of the measures that the Holy Alliance took to block the spill out, let's say, of the Greek Revolution elsewhere, was by blocking all the European ports to Greece. I mean, there was no way that Greeks could travel to Europe, or vice versa, Europeans travel to Greece, but for one exception, the port of Marseille. And this is interesting because, as I said, the French were not openly Philhellenic right from the beginning. But for some reason, the French government turned a blind eye into the use of Marseille as a point of contact, and that's where the first Philhellenes from all countries embarked to come to Greece, and how Greeks communicated with continental Europe. So there were those kinds of obstacles as well, apart from the political blackout, if you like, or the news blackouts that the hostile regimes of Europe try to establish.
You mentioned in the writings of Mavrokordatos about the state of the Ottoman Empire at the time just before the revolution, that he said that the Turks, they have no army. What did really he mean by that?
Well, of course, it might have been an exaggeration, a verbal exaggeration, but as it turned out, the Turks really didn't have reliable army. I mean, we know from the course of the Greek Revolution that until really the Egyptian support came to Greece I mean, the allies of the Turks, the Egyptians, with under Ibrahim Pasha, the Turkish troops, as such, the Ottoman troops, hadn't managed to suppress the Greek Revolution. And in fact, the most reliable troops the Ottomans had at the time were Albanians, not Turks as such. They were the ones who were fighting the Greeks because they had a similar way of fighting, like guerrilla fight and so on. But they, as such, could not suffice to suppress the Greek Revolution. So the Ottoman Sultan called the Mehmed Ali, the governor of Egypt, was semi-autonomous, and asked him to send his troops. Why? Because Mehmed Ali had organized his troops on European standards. He had also hired French officers, ex-Napoleon's officers, who organized his army. So the Egyptian army was a more modern one and following the European tactics, and that's why it was more successful in 1825 when it landed on the Greek mainland in largely suppressing the revolution in the Peloponnese. Of course, in the end, he also suffered from not just casualties, but also diseases and so on, which were prevalent at the time, not just among foreigners. Let me say here, for example, that Polychroniadis, who came to Greece, also died in 1825 out of a disease in Napoleon. He caught a disease. So it was really hard for foreigners to adjust fighting in Greek mainland because of the climate, because of the type of war, because of the hygienic conditions, and so on. And that's why perhaps the war lasted so long, apart from any other reason, because there was no way that it could be decided on one battle or two, like, say, in continental Europe with Waterloo and so on, in the Napoleonic Wars. It was a different set of circumstances altogether.
Okay, we have another comment by Terry, who had a previous comment, says Metternich was probably the greatest opponent of the Greek War of Independence.
Yes, that's a fact. But even Metternich, at some point, I think around 1824-25, had to, at least on paper, concede to some kind of Greek independence. There was an original scheme which was not put into action, in which Metternich approved of creating, I think, 3 different autonomous states in the area of Greece. One would be Epirus, the other one would be the Peloponnese, and the third one would be, I don't remember exactly, I think Macedonia or Thessaly, something like that. That didn't come to fruition because the war was still going on, and Britain was not fully involved at the time, so as to force its own views on the other countries. Okay, Metternich was against it. But another interesting thing is that Gentz, who was his right hand, kept on having contacts with Mavrokordatos, despite being political enemies and on the different sides of the political spectrum. They had some kind of communication and appreciation for each other. So, things are not just black and white, as we may want to believe. There were backstage maneuvers and plans which didn't come to fruition, as I said, and so on and so forth.
Okay, you have a question from Peter Potamianos. Hi, Peter. The question is, when do you see the confiscation of Hellenic antiquities?
Sorry, I'm not sure I understand the question.
He said, when do you see the confiscation of Hellenic antiquities? He means like the Parthenon marbles and other antiquities which were taken from Greece to England, other parts of Europe, etc.
So does the question imply when were they taken and under what circumstances? Or
when and possibly the circumstances, yeah, possibly.
Well, of course, these happened all before the Greek Revolution. The latest development in this series of removals of antiquities was the removal of the Venus de Milo, which is in Paris, in the Louvre Museum, which I think took place in 1820, very close to the beginning of the Greek Revolution. And that was not, again, just an one-off incident. It was a series of pressures and maneuvers and manipulations by which the French frigate, which was sent, as a matter of fact, from France officially, managed to actually remove the statue and take it there by bribing and pulling muscles, if you like. Elgin was much earlier. He started in 1804, and the removal of the Parthenon marbles lasted for many years, until 1811, if I remember well. It wasn't, again, a one-off incident. There was also the removal of the Achaea marbles in Aegina, which was done by a group of 2 Englishmen and 2 Germans under the guidance of Robert Cockerell, a famous architect and classicist of the time. They again bribed locals and managed to remove them quickly and auction them in Malta, where the King Ludwig I, the father of King Otto, bought them and removed them to Bavaria. Now, you may want to ask me, how is it that if King Ludwig of Bavaria, who was contemporary of the Greek Revolution, was so keen on the Greek antiquities, how could he not assist the Greek Revolution more openly? Because, as I mentioned at some point, he was also under pressure from the stronger neighbors, Prussia and Austria, who forced him to suppress any liberal activities in his country, or at least keep them under tight control so that they wouldn't expand and influence other German states. But of course, in his case, we could say that the marbles that he moved to Bavaria worked in Greece's favor in a more direct sense, in the sense that they contributed to his sympathy for Greece and his acceptance to send his second son, the subsequent King Otto, as a king of Greece. So, well, of course, you may say that also the Elgin marbles acted in that context as well, but not so obviously, I would say, not at the time at least.
Yeah, you mentioned the Greek Phanariots were administrators of the semi-autonomous regions in Moldavia and Vlachia.
Yeah.
How did it turn out to go that way?
That process had started about a century before, because of some revolution of the Romanian elite, let's say, who sided with Russians. There was a constant set of wars between Russia and Turkey in this area, the border area, which was the Danubian Principality at the time. And at some point, the Ottoman government stopped having any confidence on the Romanian archons and the Romanian elite, so they replaced them with Greeks, Greeks from Istanbul, Constantinople, who were Ottoman subjects and who had already worked in the framework of the Ottoman government, so they were more reliable. And that's how they established themselves. But of course, they were not there for life. They were the terms were renewed or stopped according to the wishes of the Sultan. And this was the case, for example, of Karadzias, the uncle of Mavrocordatos, who was removed in 1812 as a result of the last Russia-Turkish war before the Greek Revolution, because he had shown sympathy for the Russians. So he was removed. He left, and followed by Mavrocordatos, his nephew. He moved to Geneva, from there to Pisa, and that's where the whole the group was set and organized. And he was replaced by other Greeks, but there were only 4 Phanariot families in the last years before the Greek revolutions who were authorized by the Sultan to keep these offices, the 2 thrones of Moldavia and Wallachia. And Karadzias was not one of them, the Karadzias family altogether, or the Mavrocordatos as a result. So you see, there are some kind of coincidences which also play a part in the development of things.
Very good, thank you. Stefanos, I don't see any other questions. Do you see anything from the
No, I don't see anything
Facebook
on
site?
Facebook, but I had a question myself.
Okay, go ahead.
Were there any similar efforts by the Ottomans themselves to influence the Western public opinion to their favor?
Definitely not, because the Ottomans started from a different point of view. They had this arrogant belief that they could rule their countries as autocratic rulers, the sultans, without considering anybody, and that's why they had lost the public opinion struggle from day one, let alone the practices they followed, like slaughters and massacres and all that, which was the only way they knew on how to suppress any revolution or individuals that were acting against them. So their reputation had preceded them in that context, and the critical point was that the Greek Revolution would present itself not as a liberal movement fighting against a monarch, which was what the whole of the establishment, the European establishment, abhorred, but as it turned out, that it was a movement of people who were fighting for their independence from an empire which was alien in terms of European principles, because of religion, because of political practices, because of intolerance to any kind of disagreement, and so on. So the moment they managed to spin, let's say, the public opinion in this direction, and which they did fairly early, apparently, as I said, it seems that right from the summer of 1821, public opinion had already started actively expressing itself in favor of the Greeks, at least on day-to-day level of the man in the street, if not the elite. So the Ottomans, they were just, I think they could not really understand why this thing turned around in the way it did against them. And that was obvious as late as say, the Battle of Navarino, the Russo-Turkish War of 1828, when they still insisted on having the final word, despite the fact that everyone else had turned against them. I mean, even the European establishment. So yeah, that's my view on the on this.
I have read in a book, in a Greek book from a Greek professor, that after the revolution started, the Sultan had proposed to slaughter all Greeks. Is that, are you familiar?
Yes, apparently he had this idea, but I don't remember who was it convinced him otherwise. It would have been the worst mistake he could have done. Of course, we know that he slaughtered Greeks. The Greeks were slaughtered in Constantinople. The Patriarch was hanged as a complicit to the outbreak of the revolution. We know that the people in Chios were massacred despite the fact that they hadn't openly revolted en masse, and so on. But all these events turned out to be public opinion stance for the Greek cause, because they immediately turned the public opinion openly against the Turkish atrocities. So again, in a way, it was a set of circumstances, coincidental circumstances, which contributed in one way or the other to the promotion of the Greek cause without real effort in this context.
I wonder if there are any Turkish voices today that might accuse the Westerners of
No, quite the contrary. As a matter of fact, there have been books and publications by younger Turkish historians. I can mention a guy called Sukru Ilichak, who has published a set of 2 volumes of Turkish documents in well, I think the one volume is in the original texts, the original documents, and the other one is in English translation. You can find them online because they have been published, they have been sponsored as PDF volumes by a foundation. I don't remember, but I can find it out for you if you like. And he has produced all the set of documents which discredit, of course, the Ottoman Sultan at the time. And let it be heard at this point that, interestingly enough, Mahmud II, the Sultan in charge at the time, was not one of the most oppressive. As a matter of fact, he was considered a rather progressive Sultan. He was the one who dissolved the Janissaries because they had become a state within the state by overthrowing sultans and creating a regime of their own. So he dismantled the Janissaries, indirectly assisting the Greek struggle because they were supposed to be the most elite, the core that the Ottomans had at the time. Quite the opposite, in fact, but on paper, they were the more elite troops. By dissolving them, he ended up without having any real means to fight the Greeks. And that's why he had turned to the Egyptians for assistance. So, yeah, the Ottomans were not really prepared either ideologically or militarily to face such revolution. The only revolutions they had come across that far was local revolts, which they could suppress sooner or later. We have the example, for example, of the Serbian Revolution, 1805, which was suppressed. They gave autonomy to the Serbs, and that was it. The Serbs didn't revolt again for quite a few decades, and so on. There were local Topacs like Ali Pasha, for example, who would become semi-independent, and the Porte could not suppress them either. There was a time when Ali Pasha controlled the whole of Greece and Albania, either directly or indirectly, with his sons as local governors. And that was not the wish of the Sultan, but he could not or did not wish to upset the balance, either because many people in his court were bribed to keep silent, or because he didn't have the means. Anyway, the Ottoman Empire, despite appearing as a coherent state, was ideologically backward, let's say. They hadn't kept up with the Enlightenment. They could not understand it because it was out of the framework of the Muslim mind of thought. Let's not forget that the Sultan was a caliph as well of the Muslims all over the world, and so on and so forth. So they were not, as I said, they were caught off guard in every sense, if you like. So that's why things turned out as they did.
Okay.
Very good. I will close with a last comment by Terry. Thank you for highly informative lecture. Professor Konstantin Hadjidimitriou has written a book on the U.S. role in the Greek War of 1821. That was his comment.
Yes, and in fact, Professor Dimitriou has also has created a website with documents concerning the Greek-American contacts, Jefferson, Corais, and so on, which personally I found very convenient because it has ready translations of the Greek texts that I mentioned. I would like to thank your viewer for his compliment. I hope that I have done my duty, so to speak.
Thank you very much. We will close.